You are listening to a podcast from The Hindu.
Bhabha took Air India flight 101 to Geneva en route to Vienna. In those days, there was no direct flight to Vienna, and one had to go via Geneva. Bhabha was booked to Geneva on an earlier flight the day before, but for the reasons that have never been made clear, he took Air India flight 101. On 24th January, the Boeing 707 Kanchenjunga crashed into the glacier des Bossons on the southwest face of Mont Blanc at 4,807 meters at around 7 a.m. local time. It was flying on its regular route from Bombay to London via Delhi, Beirut, and Geneva. All 106 passengers, including Bhabha, and 11 crew members died in the crash. The black box from the 1966 crash was never recovered, and rescue operations were halted the day after the crash owing to inclement weather conditions. So, that, Jacob, was a description of the final movements of the father of India's nuclear program, Homi J. Bhabha. And I was reading out of his biography written by Bakhtiyar K. Dadabhoy.
I am Jacob Koshy.
And I'm Shobhana Nair, and this is the
Rearview.
Rearview.
Here we dive into the history of things, events, discoveries, and inventions. This week we shall be discussing that very famous person who died in that aircraft, Homi J. Bhabha, who was the father of India's atomic program, as you just mentioned, but also a very, very well renowned physicist, scientist, and among the pillars of the early days of India's scientific program. Along with Nehru, the first prime minister, and Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, as well as Vikram Sarabhai, they kind of laid the edifice of the modern scientific institute, two major scientific institutions, that is the Atomic Energy Commission as well as ISRO, which was started in Bhabha's early days, but was later taken on by Vikram Sarabhai.
The reason, Jacob, we're starting from his death is because it is a mystery that has refused to die, and every year a new angle is added. As recently as 2008, a book by a journalist, Gregory Douglas, where he published series of interviews with a former CIA officer, Robert T. Crawley, called The Conversations with the Crow, claimed that there was a bomb in the Boeing 707 in which Bhabha was traveling, and it went off just when the plane was.
Is that a very credible interview? What does your reading suggest?
So apparently, Douglas is a very discredited character. Crawley died, so there is no way of confirming whether Crawley did indeed say this. But Douglas, in his book, has said, was quoted as saying, "We had trouble, with India back in the 60s when they started work on an atomic bomb, bragging how clever they were and how they too were going to be a great power in the world. The thing is, they were getting into bed with the Russians." Of course, veracity of these startling claims can never be established.
The 60s were this very interesting period in India's history, because the 64 Nehru had just died, and Lal Bahadur Shastri had taken over, and he too died at Tashkent, and literally like a few weeks or days after, Homi Baba's plane
Just
also mysteriously
just 2 days before his own death, Baba was at the condolence
at the
meet for
condolence meeting,
Shastri.
right? Surprisingly, this whole period of flux comes in after nearly two, about let's say 10, 15 years, when India was had already got its freedom, and there was already that initial rush to or move by Nehru to create, with the help of scientific administrators, to create India's scientific programs. And Homi Bhabha was the guy. He was the person who, in that time, when there were debates about, India's poverty, what should we be focusing on? Shouldn't we be putting all our energies into agriculture or addressing poverty? But he puts his foot very firmly behind the need for India to build on, which was then just an emerging technological regime. Homi Bhabha had envisioned that India had to take some to be industrialized like the other countries. India had to take steps, in this program. In '74, India did have its first nuclear test, which the country said was a peaceful nuclear explosion. There are many who believe that this was kind of a beginning, where after his death, that there was a slowdown, some kind of a temporary slowdown, and a certain uncertainty or a lack of confidence, that kind of was building up very dramatically under, in the first in the 50s.
Between Bhabha and Nehru, sort of taking the center stage on this issue. Nehru, of course, talking about nuclear disarmament, and Bhabha in the back, in the back room, working towards building enough stockpile so that we could do even at least a peaceful explosion.
Now, Homi Bhabha is somebody that, of course, he is associated with nuclear history, but he was a very interesting man even before his, being catapulted to India's top scientific post, right? I mean,
Yes,
what
he
do we know about
was.
him?
Yeah, he's a fabulously interesting man. Born as Homi Jehangir Bhabha. He was born into privilege, culture on 30th October 1909 in Bombay. He was a pre-World War One child, born at a time when Indians' consciousness as a nation was just about rising, when Delhi was not yet the capital of the nation, when Calcutta was still a glittering city and the capital of British India, and the Bombay was the trading center. He was born in a bungalow named Kenilworth, located at 53 Pedar Road in South Bombay. So he was a South Bombay boy. Bhaba's family was very well off, but by no means extraordinarily wealthy.
There were more in an academy. I mean, his father, Hormuzji Bhabha, was the Inspector General of Education in the feudal state of Mysore, I believe, and his father was a lawyer. Who had married a granddaughter of Sir Dinshaw Petit, the founder of the famous library in Bombay. But he had a very famous uncle.
Yes, yes, extremely famous uncle. The Babas were connected to the Tatas through marriage. A connection that will, as we shall see, have far reaching consequences on Baba's own career and his intellectual growth.
And in fact, his uncle, as Dorabji Tata, was somebody who had actually founded. He had donated to one of the schools in Oxford. And I believe young Homi was actually brought up to one day be an engineer and join the Tata school.
You have
Tata Engine.
skipped several decades here, as usual, Jacob, in your hurry to reach the story. So let me pull you
I'm just so
back.
excited about what's to come.
Let me pull you back a few years, at least a few years back. So before we get into his scientific career and everything, a small word about Bhabha. He had a very natural appreciation of music. By the time he was a young adult, not even young adult. By the time he was 10 or 12, he could differentiate between a Mozart and a Bach, and the usual. He grew up among books. He grew up among music.
Which was kind of part of the cultural milieu of the Parsis of Bombay. So it was a kind of class bringing upbringing. He was a very accomplished pianist and a violinist, I believe, and very much like the Einsteinian figure, who was always to be found with his violin. He too was somebody, and he was up with all the latest jazz, all the latest dances, and very much
And a
the
brilliant painter
yeah,
also. A
and
brilliant.
brilliant, of course,
Yeah.
Picasso
We shall come to the painting bit, but now why don't you tell us more about his sort of struggle between the physics and the engineering that he
yeah. So like all like his I believe he was his family had encouraged him to to go to pursue a career in engineering, so that he could join the Jamshedji works in the Tata's industrial concerns, and I believe he took the tripos. I mean, he was preparing for the tripos at Cambridge, but he was drawn towards towards the more theoretical sciences. But and like a good father, his dad said that if he successfully mastered his engineering degree, then he could choose whatever he wanted. So for all the privilege and all of those things, he seemed to be very much. He was not a Nobel, he needed to be somebody who knew that he had to work for a living, and his father they had his parents seem to have similar mentalities, like how parents would tell children today, right? Yeah, you can do whatever you want, but finish your degree first.
Yeah.
And
But how he hated engineering, how he hated
yeah,
engineering. We have all these letters that he wrote to his father, and I'm quoting from one of the letters. He said, "No exam was ever a test of original or creative ability in anybody. However, don't let that disturb you. You shall get the results you want." And of course, Bhabha kept his promise. He got first class in the mechanical engineering tripos in 1930.
yeah. And so ironic, because later on in life, he was somebody who directed what would be engineering. I mean, the design of reactors, the kind of equipment that would be required. This is all far more geared towards the applied, aspects of nuclear engineering than theoretical aspects of nuclear. So I guess Daddy was right in preparing him for an engineering. Uh,
Daddies are always right, they can foresee.
they know what's going to happen. So anyway, but he was a brilliant physicist, because he won in 1938, for example. He won the prestigious Adams Prize in physics, and he had actually very strong collaborations with Heisenberg, among one of the most famous scientists, as far as in who pioneered the quantum revolution. And Heisenberg was of course also uh, chosen, unfortunately, by Hitler, to lead the German nuclear program.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and of course, that is of course there's this whole separate fight, story about how Heisenberg, being part of the German nuclear program, then prompted Einstein's own concerns when he was in the US as as an immigrant refugee, and that in turn then kick-started the Manhattan Project, and for the and which led to the US developing its own program. So there was always, so Heisenberg, and these were the kind of people that he kind of liaised with. And after his engineering, he began theoretical physics, studying theoretical physics with John Cockcroft, Blackett, and James Chadwick, the guy who discovered the neutron. So and this was all at the at the the very prestigious Cavendish Library. He published his first physics paper in German in October 1933 in the Zeitschrift für Physik at age 24. And then he was elected to the Isaac Newton studentship that allowed him to be in Cambridge for the next 3 years and complete his PhD under the supervision of R.H. Fowler. And it was in this time that he traveled around. He actually went to Copenhagen, and he worked at the same institute, which was the Copenhagen Institute that was founded by Niels Bohr.
Yeah.
And over here, he actually met the other formidable Indian scientist, Emens Meghnad Saha, the
and
the
and
Calcutta
and
School
hold
of,
on to the name Meghnad Saha,
because he's
because
always
he
recurring.
will reappear in our story ahead.
Yeah. And so it's because of this kind of people, I mean, these were all the legends of physics, of the physics world in that time. So he actually saw himself in that world. In fact, at this time, there was no real clarity that Baba would actually ever come back to India. I think he was somebody who would have probably pursued a career in theoretical physics, in the UK, for instance. And but it was these contacts, this worldview, and of course Nehru, whom you would meet, I guess, more closely later, was also from Cambridge, but in very different streams. In fact, there's this very, I mean, Bhava, I believe, had said at some point that it was at Cambridge that he said that I would either have become a communist or a scientist, but and we know
And
which
he
path
chose to be a
he chose
scientist.
to be a scientist, because so he was absorbing, there was, because this was also the time of a lot of intellectual ferment in Europe, in England specifically. So these were these ideas, and then of course the World War broke out, and he ended up having to
Come
come
to
to
India.
India.
But Jacob, before we bring Bhabha back to India, talk us through why is Bhabha considered a great scientist? You said that he published his
Yeah.
first paper at 24, but what was his contribution to physics that he loved so much, so intensely?
So one of his most significant contributions was in the field of high energy physics, particularly the study of cosmic rays. So he developed this important theoretical model known as Bhabha scattering. So this has to do with the interaction between electrons and positrons, positively charged electrons, which laid the foundation for understanding the behavior of matter and antimatter. There was also a Bhabha Hitler theory, I mean HEITLER, regarding the interaction of high energy gamma rays with matter. And all of this kind of helped shape the future of quantum mechanics and led to new directions in particle physics.
So, can you imagine Bhabha, for all his love in physics, did not win a Nobel Prize? He was surrounded by Nobel Prize winners. All his life, he was surrounded by them, and he was both a nominee as well as a nominator. But he was nominated 5 times by a French mathematician, Jacques Hadamard, for the prize in 1951, 53, 54, 55, 56. But he never won. And there's an interesting story behind why that did not happen. Apparently, the French mathematician was very old by the time all the 5 years that he proposed Bhaba's name, and he did not back up his nomination with convincing evidence. Um, and as a result, it was never taken seriously. Now, for the first time when he was nominated in 1951, the Nobel Committee noted that Hadamard had nominated Bhabha for his work on cosmic radiation without providing extensive reasons. While agreeing that Bhabha had done important work, the committee decided that it could not recommend him for the prize at that time. Then Bhabha was renominated by Hadamard in 53 but was rejected. The committee merely noted that it had investigated his nomination in the recent past and no new developments had occurred.
This was a time when when a whole bunch of discoveries of elementary particles, I mean, a lot of people actually just secured Nobels just for that, and Bhabha had now branched into this uh, realm of investigation of cosmic ray physics. That is a massive field, in basically just trying to understand its character, the differences between different kinds of mesons or different kinds of particles at various levels of the atmosphere. Now this was, for instance, even Vikram Sarabhai, who was slightly younger to him. He too worked on on similar strains. So by this time there was this it was far harder to get Nobel prizes for particle based discoveries. Again in the 60s, this came, but this was he was active in this period when this kind of had dried up. And plus, at this peak, I mean, probably if he had persisted for some more time, because this was also a time then he kind of moved away from theoretical
Precisely,
physics
precisely.
and his whole India chapter started.
Yeah,
When, of
as
course, Raman, as you
yeah.
just mentioned.
So, as you said, that when the Second World War broke, Bhabha was back, and of course, his study of pure sciences took a back seat as he graduated as a science institution maker, scientific institution maker. And the interesting thing is, his he was writing while he was in Cambridge. He wanted to write. He was working on a book on elementary particles, but this was never completed and never published.
In fact, he was also called for for a post of for a physics for as a physics professor at Liverpool University, and they had just built their first 37-inch cyclotron. So he was in fact interviewed by James Chadwick over there, and there were the reason why Bhabha was actually rejected from that position was because Heitler, of the famous equation of which he co-shares a name. So he was interviewed by James Chadwick, and there were two people for that post. One was Werner Heitler, and one was Bhabha. And Chadwick actually refused Bhabha because he said he was, in quotes, too good for Liverpool, and students and much of the teaching would be drudgery to a man like Baba, who was a most exceptional man. He was a painter and a poet and had extremely wide interests, and not merely interests, but far more than that. And I didn't feel that however much I liked him, it was fair. So, but ultimately, even Heitler never got a position, and it was a third person who got that position. So, but yeah, and it was when he was in India he turned out to be in India in 1939, and war broke out, and I guess
The
he never
rest,
ended up
yeah, the
going
rest, as they
back.
say, is history. He never went back, and he was here
And went to, yeah.
constructing various great
So he
institutions.
first started out at the Institute of Science in Bangalore, and it was from there that he actually first felt the differences between doing science in Bangalore or India as compared to the environment in
Europe.
Cambridge. Yeah. But interestingly, we learned that it was in India that he wrote that essay that won him the Adams Prize at Cambridge, and where he actually did his one of his most significant works, which is now known as the Bhabha equation. So it wasn't that he was just he had abandoned his theoretical pursuits all along. So then when at Bangalore, he accepted a post that was created just for him as a reader in theoretical physics at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. This was a learning period for him because just prior to Bhabha actually joining IISc, there was already this gulf, or this, these two rival schools of physics and science that were happening in India. So one was the Calcutta School of Scientists, which was led by Meghnad Saha, and then there was the Raman School. So this was the beginning of the North, as they called the North South. Though I think actually it was just an East. It's an
Yeah,
East West,
East
South, and East South
divide.
divide. Yeah, maybe Shanti Sarup, but Bhatnagar was from Allahabad. So that probably could be the North with this. But that's when
Oh, we can call it plains of Ganga versus Godavari divide.
possibly, yeah. But it was here that he started envisioning what India ought to be doing. In this was
But this was
39,
it was
yeah.
here that he felt the craving that India needed a center that worked for pure sciences, for physics, which can be made, and that is probably sort of the conception of Tata Institute of Fundamental Research.
Yeah.
Probably sort of must be rattling through his brain around this time, I'm sure.
Yeah, but this was still in the 40s, so he was very much. I mean, this was the early 40s. In fact, Raman actually nominated him for FRS, the Fellow of the Royal Society. So again, he was later on offered a chair of physics at the University of Allahabad. But
He didn't take that, no?
no, he did not take that too. And he started after it was his uh, nomination as an FRS, and his work as a this thing, that he started moving away from. I mean, he never. I mean, if you ever approached him in life, he would always consider himself a scientist, and he being very passionate about the theoretical work that he did. But that was then the time. Then
He also had his differences with Raman, like most Indian great scientists had, I believe. Was
everybody,
was
but
it one of the reasons for him to move out of the Bangalore
no, not really,
Institute?
because it was, but because even this was also, I mean, later on, even Vikram Sarabhai, joining that. This was a this it was over here that these scientists started doing this famous balloon experiments, where they started to build. They had to build up facilities, attract people, build up research groups. So it was this that actually gave him this flavor of building things. And later on, he, as you said, he envisioned that we need to think bigger, we need to have bigger groups. And that's when then he started writing to institutions like the Tata Trusts, etc., for more funding to be able to build better better universities. And eventually it was this this pushing for that ultimately led to the creation of the TIFR. I mean, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, because that time there was only the IIC, which again was a privately established scientific institution. But clearly the need was felt for for more things. So eventually, after Bhava made a case for for an institute that especially for pursuing balloon related research. So it was here that this germ of an idea that you need to go beyond just having research groups and have better institutions. That's when he approached JRD Tata, and he actually told him that the advancement of science is one of the fundamental objects with which most of the Tata Trusts were founded. And he made a formal proposal to him to establish a research institute, where he said, it is absolutely in the interest of India to have a vigorous school for research in fundamental physics. For such a school forms the spearhead of research, not only in the less advanced branches of physics, but also in the problems of immediate practical application to industry. If much of the applied research done in India today is disappointing and of very inferior quality, it is due to the absence of a sufficient number of outstanding, pure research workers who could set the standards of good research. Moreover, when nuclear energy has been successfully applied for power production in, say, a couple of decades from now, India will not have to look abroad for its experts, but find them ready at home.
Yeah.
So this was the first time this the famous Bhaba's link between nuclear power, nucleus, atomic energy research and power production was made. And from here, eventually you had the TIFR forming.
Yeah.
But this was the first time the first institutions germinated.
So you have to take a pause here, Jacob, and appreciate the fact that Bhabha came back to India in 1939, and the first time that he writes to the Tata Trust asking to form an institute of the caliber of TIFR is in 1943. So he spends only 4 years. He is very restless. He wants a Cambridge like atmosphere for himself and all his other comrades.
Yeah, and so he started work on the institute, right away, and he began to plan meetings for the Atomic Energy Committee and India's nuclear development. It started to gestate by 1946. So even before India was independent, you already had the brick and mortar in place for setting up. And it was actually a this it was the war actually that that actually uh, gave brought home that to these scientists that you really need to be investing very heavily in nuclear research if at all India wanted to be a respectable uh, technologically developed country.
And as we told you right in the beginning, that Baba was a painter. Baba was an aesthete. He loved his music. He loved his art. And similarly, in the construction of TIFR, I don't know, Jacob, have you been to TIFR? Yeah, I've been only once, and the institute is sort of, but the memories just keep coming back. It is first, it is so beautifully located, just at the edge of the sea, and it's just one of the most beautiful buildings. And Baba had a huge role to play because he was extremely particular about how it should be constructed, how he was interacting with the architects on a daily basis. And the very interesting thing that I want to talk to you about is how Baba wanted to bring Picasso to make a mural at the TIFR. A wall in the entrance of the hall of the new TIFR building was 45 feet long, 9 feet in height. Baba wanted to cover it with a mural. In keeping with his desire for excellence, he set in motion the ambitious plan to invite Picasso to India to paint the mural. But of course, he had no money to offer to Picasso. So, what did he offer? He told Picasso, "Listen, my dear, you come to India, I will give you first class return airfare and you can stay at Taj. And I will also throw you a few trips around interesting places in India." And of course,
I just find it so hard to believe that he couldn't get money to pay Picasso. I mean, was money the real issue over here? I mean, come on, who's going to? I'm sure he could have. He got all kinds of people, and he was. I mean, he got all kinds of scientists at. But it's very
so of
strange.
course, Picasso never
Never came.
replied to his.
Cheapskate, he must have thought of Baba, right?
But do you know the other interesting thing? Because TIFR is partially funded by the government of India also. So
And Bombay,
and
state of Bombay.
yeah, the Tata Trust. So he had to take permission for every expenditure from the various stakeholders. Now, art was not just a form of recreation for Bhava; it was a serious pursuit. So he attached so much importance that Bhava convinced India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, who we shall see in due course would be breaking several rules for because of his proximity to Bhabha and letting Bhabha have his way in most things.
You have reached the end of part 1 of this episode. Jacob and Shobna will be right back with part 2, where they get into how Bhabha went about setting up the first reactors, his relationship with Nehru, and why nuclear power is still such a small proportion of electricity in India. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening.